Welcome back. In this tutorial we're going to look at the scene structure and all the pieces that needed to actually have everything working correctly. The key component is of course the character. The second component is the camera rig. This is the camera that you interact with in-game and which handles all the various states. We'll see that in a few minutes. Then you have the action glyph manager. This is used by the UI to map action names such as generic action, jump, crouch, combat action, so on, to keyboard and controller glyphs so that UI adapts to showing you what your inputs are. Quick example. We have this character which has a sword. And you can see in the lower bottom right corner the action you can perform with the weapon you have currently, which is unarmed. So you can trigger a weak attack with mouse button, you can trigger a strong attack with number 1, you can parry with the right button, and you can trigger a strong attack with shift and mouse button. If I go into play mode with a controller instead of the keyboard, these don't change because the legacy input system does not have a way to detect what input you are using. But if you're using the new input system or rewire, this will change to controller icons that display the controls for the buttons for the controller you're using. Then you have the canvas, which handles the quick slot UI, the action UI, stamina and health, the event system which is needed for the UI, and you have the game manager. The game manager is the component that handles the link between the character and other components, that tracks your character in case you switch character at runtime. It can handle spawning at different spawn points and some other feature. Example, let's make this scene a little bit varied. Let's make a cube. And let's move it forward. So this cube is currently in front of the player, but we can create an empty transform. We can move it here, for example. We can call this spawn point. We can go to game manager, say use spawn points, add this spawn point, and then if I press start, the character will start at the spawn point. As an alternative, you have, well, if you have multiple, you can pick a random one. Alternative is this start at scene camera point. This, let's put another cube. Let's duplicate this one, put it there, and then I can go all the way here, and I can select the game manager with this start at scene camera, and with the game manager selected, I can press play and start at the location of the camera. This is very useful if you have a very large scene. for example, because you're making an open world game and you want to quickly test something that you put, again as another example, in this corner over here, and you don't want to spend time walking all the way to that location. And here you are. This works only if the game manager is selected. If the game manager is not selected and I go into play mode, I start at this location, because the game manager needs to track your camera movement in the scene to be able to spawn the camera. So if you want to exploit this functionality, you can you can add another inspector, put it down here with the game manager, lock it. So now you can do what you need to do and go into play mode at the location of the camera. The game manager also handles respawning, so you can have auto respawning on death. That's the delay. You can respawn at a spawn point or the last place you were. You have an event that you can use on respawn. You can hide the cursor in game. You can set the time scale in the inventory and in game. And some add-ons also add other options to the game manager, so it's a very important point. Then the other key component, as we said, is the camera. The camera rig has some key parameters. You can use debug info, and this in game mode shows you what the camera is looking at. The camera has the concept of states. The states define how the camera behaves. There's a normal state, an aiming state, a lock-on state. There's a state for finisher and executions. There's a first-person camera and a custom mode that is set at runtime by certain components in certain specific states. For every state, you have the camera the target arm length, which is how far the camera needs to be from the player. You have the offset from the target and the socket offset. Minimum and maximum zoom distance. You have cameras that are at a fixed location. For example, the lock-on camera looks at the player from the side to show the lock-on camera looks at the player from behind. We'll go into more detail on the lock-on camera in the combat tutorials. The finisher camera looks from the side, so to show the animation of the finisher and the execution, and so on. You can change the parameters of the camera only in edit mode. For example, I can put this to 6, and the camera will be more distant from the player. Or I can put this to 3, and the camera will be closer to the player. You can tweak these parameters based on the model you're using, if you're using a smaller model or a bigger model, to better track your character in the scene. And that's it for all the scene components.